Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Uh, basically, I took a week off. Part of the reason is due to, yes, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and I wanted to give some time, not necessarily to mourn, but just out of respect for the whole political hostility thing that was going on. I didn't want to pour fuel in the fire or anything like that. At the same time, though, it's always just a good excuse to just take a break, right? I have been juggling a lot at work and what's going on, so I figured with all the kerfuffle going on, it would just be a better excuse if I just took a week off. And sure enough, it was restful. So I'm back at it. We're here. We're talking about racism in mass media today. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm really just going to be jumping right into it. For those of you who are listening on the Instagram live stream, if you want to see access to the slides or something like that, essentially how this works is in the link in my bio. You can always find at the very top of my link tree a link to the Zoom session where you're welcome to jump in. After we cover the lecture period, we will then dive into Q&A. You'll be able to unmute your mic, show your video if you want to, talk to me directly, ask me questions either about the material that we've covered, or just in general, any concepts relating to race or racism or anything like that. I also live stream on Instagram, obviously, so if you don't want to jump into the Zoom or anything like that, you're welcome to hang out here. And then during the Q&A portion of the exam, I'll be taking questions. I do read questions from the chat as well. So if it's more convenient for you to be here, then it's more convenient for you to be here, okay? Great, let's dive into this. So we are talking about race in mass media, or racism in mass media, rather. And this is a fairly interesting topic that I really like to talk about, particularly because it covers things like film, television, radio, those kinds of things, and just the history therein. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that the very first feature-length film ever to be made in the history of global cinema, not just US cinema, but global cinema, is this film called The Birth of a Nation. And it's an adaptation from a book directed by D.W. Griffith. And this is the first time that a person was able to take a motion picture camera and then artificially compose stylized images with the effort of advancing a story. This film is often regarded as a critical foundation of modern cinema and would go on to eventually be screened in the White House by President Woodrow Wilson. Now, what's notable here is that you can see that what this film absolutely does, without ambiguity here, is it's glorifying the KKK. And we briefly talked about this in the weeks prior. You can have access to my YouTube lectures where you may see me cover this. But during the Reconstruction era in the United States, this was a period in time in which Black people were now free from enslavement. And there was an effort to give them the right to vote. And so, in giving them the right to vote, they had the ability, anyway, to run for political office. And so, there were, in fact, many Black people that ran for political office and won seats, won election, and with their minimal power, were working to dismantle racial segregation, not necessarily to make themselves better than white people, but to make themselves equal to white people. And so this fanned the flames of a lot of racial animosity. This also sparked the birth of the conservative political movement in the United States, in which there were lots of white supremacists who felt like America was under attack, America was under siege, and that they needed to do something in order to save their country and to save American sovereignty and American democracy. Well, this is what led to the birth of the KKK. And the KKK would then go on to lynch, to maim, to murder, to rape, to commit acts of terror, and to essentially kind of hostile overtake the United States and would essentially maintain control over the United States for the following 30 or so years. Okay, so this film, Birth of a Nation, is kind of inspired by the events of what took place at one point during Reconstruction. Now, the Birth of a Nation is still an alternate period in history. It's an alternate timeline in which this period in history is fictionalized. So, in this fictional version of America, Black people not only got the right to run for office and win, but in running for office and winning, they would then come to dominate part of the United States congressional body. And so this gives a plot-related motive for the KKK to rise up and to save America. And so this film was highly celebrated for many years, ultimately leading to its lasting legacy. And one of those things you can see here is blackface. I want to show you a clip from this film. Hopefully, this will work. I want to show you this clip. In this clip, what you're going to see here, this is a silent film, okay? And with silent film, you have to understand that it's more so about what you see than what you hear. So pay special attention to the images, to the pictures, to what you see going on, both in the foreground and in the background. And then after we watch this clip, I'll briefly kind of cover a review. I'm playing YouTube, by the way, so I'm absolutely sorry if a YouTube live stream decides to play a commercial or something like that. Consider it free advertisement, but I'm not doing that on purpose. I apologize. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, right? We saw people eating chicken, people who didn't have shoes on, people sneaking drinks of alcohol from a flask. It's very unruly, it's chaotic, it's disorganized. And clearly, there's a lot of racial commentary too. You see some actors that are portraying characters in blackface, you see other actors that really are black people. So there's an interesting mixture going on there. And obviously, the sort of the theme of what you see is that white people are powerless to do anything to stop America from turning down this quote unquote dark direction in its history. And so you can see very much that in this is from an early scene in the film, it's setting up for what would inevitably be the emergence of the KKK to rise up and save America, right? And so you see the black people are passing laws to legalize the intermarriage between blacks and whites. They're trying to silence white people. They're trying to make white people yield to their power. There's lots of racial commentary going on there. And so this, believe it or not, sets the stage for what would inevitably be like race commentary in mass media. This film was highly praised, highly celebrated and toured around the country. I want to say, somebody feel free to fact check me in the chat, something like 15 years or so. You have to remember during this time, as the first feature length film, it's not like there are necessarily movie theaters. There's not necessarily a booming business in the production of films. So this film was in circulation for quite a while before more films would eventually follow. Okay. And so as we move through history, then we're not just talking about race politics and film exclusively, which I will inevitably come back around to. But instead, we're talking about a period in time in which there's lots of racial commentary going on. We're exploring this time period now between, let's say, 1918 and 1932. This is around the time period that we would refer to as the Harlem Renaissance. And there were other kind of artistic booms during this period in time too, not just in Harlem, but in other major metropolitan cities too. But this is the first time period in which you have a generation of Black people who are stepping into adulthood and have never known what it's like to be enslaved. Their parents were slaves, and as slaves, their parents were prohibited from artistic expression of any kind. Were prohibited from being able to paint or to learn how to read and write literature, to be able to play music beyond just singing a tune with their regular voice. So it became a thing where, like, prior to the Harlem Renaissance, there was this period in which to the rest of the world, what it meant to be Black was just blackface. It was just actors. Most of the time, it was white actors, but a few times there were Black actors too that would smear their faces in a kind of burnt cork to create this over exaggerated Black clown face look. And then from there, they would attempt to act quote unquote niggardly. Okay. And so niggardly meant that they were trying to represent the stereotypical characteristics of what they understood Blackness to be. At the same time that I'm telling you this, I think what's also clear, you can see here, I want to say this is Shirley Temple. I don't know for with 100% certainty. If there's somebody who can fact check this, I would absolutely love you to do so. This young girl who appears to look like Shirley Temple, dressed up in blackface as a mammy and is kind of tucked up under the arm of this actual Black girl. And so what you can very clearly see is that there are no Black people that are reminiscent of this kind of caricature at all. And so it starts to open up for deeper questions about, well, what does it actually mean to be Black? Because to the Black people that are coming out of this generation where they've never known slavery, they're exploring painting, they're exploring literature, they're exploring music and art and all of these things. And then they're going and they're creating their own. And in creating their own, they're producing art that is uniquely distinct and different from the blackface caricatures that had existed for, I want to say, something like 100 years prior to the emergence of the Harlem Renaissance. Okay. And so what's happening is blackface doesn't immediately just disappear into the background. During the Harlem Renaissance, there's like a co-evolution of notions of blackface entertainment with actual African American art, what would be called colored music or colored art. And so, with colored art in mainstream American society, it was kind of made taboo. It was made to be inappropriate to listen to colored music. It was made to be something that is like a sin almost. It's sacrilege in a way. It's inappropriate to entertain these forms of art. And so what happens is American society is kind of evolving two distinct groups in parallel. There's a group of people who call themselves conservative and find themselves still appealing to these notions of overly racist, overly generalizing, and far removed from the humanity of Black identity, the entertainment of blackface. And so their appeal is internalized by this belief that's actually what it means to be Black. They know to some extent it's exaggerated, it's fictional, but that is what Black people are to them. And so they are making taboo actual Black art where the rest of the world is then going, wait, Black people can do this, Black people can write this way, Black people are capable of painting, and wow. And so the rest of the world is stunned but most of white America, as consumers, I mean, are still kind of treating this form of art with hesitation. And what's happening here is the Harlem Renaissance is kind of setting the stage for the formation of what we would later call Black culture, where Black culture is very much human. It's grounded in reality, it's grounded in history. You never see Black people again try to willfully turn to entertainment forms like blackface when they can just bring their true artistic expressions to reality in real life. And so it becomes a booming industry in which, for the first time, you have lots of Black people that are stepping into positions of wealth because their art is becoming widely distributed, widely popularized, and even among audiences that treat their art forms as taboo, they tend to listen to them and enjoy them behind closed doors. Okay. So what's happening is that through the evolution of the Harlem Renaissance, you have corporate America, right? America was founded on capitalism. So yes, corporate America did in fact exist during this time. You had lots of people who had money and resources to be able to widely distribute Black art with financial interest, right? And so corporate America is clearly seeing that like there's a growing popularity and a potential market niche for people who are consumers of colored music and colored art, right? And so corporate America, obviously, it's a financial opportunity, a fairly lucrative one at that, wants to give these Black artists the financial resources to be able to continue to produce their art, but then to also widely distribute it and make profits. But what happens is, as Black artists become accepted under the wing of corporate America, and they are stepping into positions of financial growth and maturation, you have this phenomenon where corporate America is trying to make these artists widely acceptable. And in trying to make them more widely acceptable, are trying to make them acceptable to broader white consumers, meaning that many artists who want to have the broad exposure, who want to gain popularity and financial success from their exposure to mainstream American society, are then forced to compromise, to mask, or subordinate their true feelings or their values, perhaps even their artistic expressions, because those things are like seen as too Black. And too Black here is an expression to describe what I can describe as a potential threat to notions of white superiority and white comfort. This idea that if a Black person artistically expresses their genuine human feelings about whatever it is that they're experiencing in life and who they're experiencing it from, that presents itself as a potential threat to notions of whiteness. So it creates this phenomenon called the Black performer paradox, where the Black performer paradox is basically Black artists are then forced to use their art that was critical in reshaping how the rest of the world even saw them, but now to entertain their oppressor. And so this was no more apparent than in musical forms, for example, where early on in lots of Harlem Renaissance music, in the lyrics, yes, they had a poetic layer of interpretation and depth, but the lyrics also themselves had like I suppose I would describe as like uh, a way to critique the hypocrisy of white America in both enjoying colored music that they stigmatize, and then they want to support Black artists behind closed doors, but won't do so openly. It's just a very critical thing. And so what happens is many of these popular artists, not necessarily just Ella Fitzgerald, for example, essentially make themselves out to be like puppets on a string, where there's mass appeal to Black art, but in essence, they're forced to give up their artistic autonomy and expression for the politics of white supremacy. Now, at the same time, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, where you had the Harlem Renaissance, you still had Black art. You still had, and by art, I'm talking about paintings, drawings. You had poetry, you had literature, you had all of these things. At the very same time, I'd also mentioned that blackface entertainment never went away. It co-evolved with America too. And so what's happening is while you have authentically Black artistic expression that is creating what we now call Black culture in America. You also have in the 1930s radio shows that are coming out where basically at first they did not have Black radio performers. They restricted Black people from having access to radio waves as announcers, as broadcast journalists, as technicians, because there was this subtle fear that if a Black person were to get in proximity to a radio of some kind, that they might jeopardize the integrity of that radio, upset millions of Americans, because not only are they a Black person essentially stepping into white people's homes, but they're also introducing their Black sentiments, their Black ideologies, their Black politics, which are fundamentally problematic to most Americans, who, again, most white Americans are fundamentally conservative by this point. Okay. So, where you have entertainment shows in the 1930s that are entertaining the masses, any kind of performance art shows are really just done and performed by white people. And all of the programs that are on these radio waves are designed to appeal or cater to white families and white audiences. So they still have blackface entertainment on the radio waves, where most of Black America at this particular point in time has turned away from this. White America still finds this appealing. So what happens is you end up with shows like Amos and Andy, for example, in which white entertainers are using they're leveraging typical blackface minstrelsy in order to portray Black archetypes or Black characters. Now, no, on the radio waves, they're not necessarily wearing blackface, but because America is kind of familiar with the forms of speech or the forms of expression that are associated with blackface minstrelsy, it becomes a thing where it's easy to distinguish, right? Basically, white performers had a tight grip on access to the radio waves, where you had other Black performers who indeed wanted to play live shows, play music, sing songs, perform their own programs, but were intentionally restricted from doing so. And so Amos and Andy, for example, ends up becoming one of the most popular radio programs across the United States, in which millions of people would tune in. And really, it was just about entertaining white audiences. But because Black people had access to the radio too, they too would tune into these shows and also found them entertaining too. So what ends up happening is Amos and Andy, which were originally characters that were, first of all, written and performed by Charles Correll and Freeman Gosden, are reinforcing these notions of racial subordination for Black people in America. This show became so popular on the radio that with the invention of the television and therefore television programs, Amos and Andy would morph into a televised version in which the characters, Amos and Andy, are then played by actual Black people, but they still embody blackface minstrelsy. Okay. So Amos and Andy becomes a fundamental part of American entertainment culture during this time. And so what's happening under the surface is that for about 20 years or so, Amos and Andy is the only depiction of Black people on national airwaves. Okay. And so because you have 20 years of programming the United States of America, including white people who may not have ever been around Black people in their life, it meant that for most of America, this clearly shaped what it meant to be Black. And it reinforced these notions for most white listeners that they were, in fact, superior, that Blackness is almost like an affliction in a way. And part of the reason why this shapes how America perceives Black identity is because on these national airwaves, they never talk about the psychological costs of racism and slavery, for example. Never have, even today, I don't think I've ever seen this, a blackface minstrel crying in sadness or in pain about how they had to witness their mom or their sister or their child sold away in slavery because as a form of punishment to the rest of the group. You don't see images of a black face minstrel talking about the fears of being in an all-white neighborhood past sundown, for example. You don't see a blackface minstrel talking about having the skills and competency for a job that this business around the corner wants to hire for, but they're only hiring white people, right? So it creates a thing in which there's this bottleneck on what it means to be black. And absolutely none of that is tied to blackface minstrelsy at all. So America is having its impressions of what it means to be black kind of painted, dictated in a way by the reproduction of these images in this form of entertainment. Okay, and so it essentially taught white America for quite some time that whenever black people are positioned as the thing you need to focus on, you don't have to take them seriously. There's something to laugh at. There's going to be a joke at some point in time. It just becomes a thing where like America is primed with this notion that to be black, either on screen or on the radio waves or even off screen, is to implicitly be subordinate. Okay. Um, and so what's happening through the evolution of the radio, through the evolution of, let's say, like in the middle of World War II, okay, entertainment media is evolving. And what's happening is there are lots of producers of the Amos and Andy show, for example, lots of producers of different kinds of film during this period in time, in which they're finding that certain forms of art have appeal to white audiences and black audiences. And so maybe there's a niche to capture in which you might be able to make race film. And race film are those films that feature or center characters of color or have characters of color in prominent roles. And they're trying to expand their audience by reaching out to colored audiences, right? But never are those black people centered as like a hero or as powerful or as autonomous. For example, these black actors are generally cast to play characters that are like designed to ease or comfort or reassure white audiences that even though they see black people on the screen, they're not a threat to their notion of superiority. Okay. So this meant that lots of black characters that find themselves in film, for example, especially in the late 30s, are usually playing like servile roles where they're like a housemaid, they're a servant of some kind, or they're like dim-witted and stupid. They're like a buffoon. Imagine, for example, the meme, the modern meme around Homer Simpson, right? The Simpsons was the first TV show to portray a dysfunctional family with a father who is not really a leader. He's kind of dim-witted and stupid. And so this then sets the stage for later animated family sitcoms in which the father is always like really stupid or like a buffoon. In that same light, this is kind of what's happening for Black people. Okay, is that like you have films like Gone with the Wind, for example, where you have prominent Black actresses like Hattie McDaniel and Butterfly McQueen, for example, who are playing like the Black stars of the film. But as the stars of the film, they're just servants. They're still dirty. They are featured as like mammies in a way. The mammy is a specific minstrel caricature that let's say doesn't have a sexuality. She's overly dutiful to her white counterparts. In a way, she is overly devoted to giving them service and spends more time giving service to those white people than she does her own family. For example, anytime she's on screen with other black people, for example, she's usually chastising them or telling them that they need to fix themselves or there's something wrong with them. It's those kinds of things. And so what happens is not only does is Hattie McDaniel kind of centered as like a major star for this film for her quote unquote phenomenal portrayal of this character, but then the mammy archetype becomes a repeated mimetic phenomenon in later films for decades, actually. There's lots of Black people, even during this time period, that were upset that Hattie McDaniel was the first Black actress to win an Oscar, because even as she won the Oscar, she was forced to enter into the theater through the colored section. And she was forced to sit in the colored section, which was all the way in the back, and took a while for her to get to the stage where then people are clapping for her. And then she has to go back to the colored section. And so it becomes a thing where, like, lots of Black people are complaining that white America has this fixation on celebrating notions of racial subordination in film that don't accurately portray Black people in any real light. Hattie McDaniel would go on to receive criticism from a lot of Black people that she was essentially typecast in multiple films as a female Tom, as a housemaid that did nothing but damage cultural notions of Blackness and didn't see to dignify them at all. So with actors like Paul Robeson, for example, you have Paul Robeson is one of those rare few actors during this particular time in the 30s in which he is determined to secure roles that dignified the Black image. Okay, dignified Black people and gave them positions of power, portrayed them as being knowledgeable and articulate and smart and wise. He was a Shakespearean theater actor, as in addition to being a film actor. But one of the critiques, the main critiques about Paul Robeson, especially during the 30s, is that all of the characters that he would play are then contextualized by some form of struggle, not necessarily racialized struggle, but the interpretation of what we see on the screen is that his characters, while they are in fact dignified, they're only dignified in defiance of racism. And so, as like let's say cinema is evolving through time, let's say through the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s, there's this constant push among Black America for more dignified roles. They want to see themselves as powerful. They want to see themselves as wise. They don't want to see themselves as subordinate to whiteness or contrasted to whiteness in any way. They want to feel like when they walk into a movie theater to watch a Black character on the screen, that that character is like authentically Black. So by the 70s, I'll even say late 60s, the late 60s, all the way through to, I want to say, the early 80s. You had this period called the Blaxploitation era, where the Blaxploitation era has a lot of these very cheeky, low budget, campy films, but are standoutish and unique because they center quote unquote authentically Black leads and stories that resonate with Black audiences. Now, yes, to some extent, when I'm saying quote unquote here, I'm still acknowledging that they're fictionalized. They're still fictional plots, fictional characters. It's just that the characters themselves and their humanity appeals more to Black people who find themselves living amongst other Black people and who have sentiments that are not easily shared or expressed to white others, right? And so early on, the Blaxploitation era was very successful on this front. They tended to portray lots of Black characters as being self-sufficient, assertive, rebellious to some extent, and they would intentionally make commentary on a lot of the stereotypes that had existed in films in the decades prior, where these characters are then challenging those stereotypes. And then some of those stereotypes end up getting reinforced in an interesting interpretive way. A lot of the Blaxploitation era films also had this way of being in your face about its commentary. So, like in the image that you see here on the right, for example, where they say starring the Black community, right? It's kind of funny in a way. It's a hilarious comedic commentary, but for its time, it was something that was speaking to the audiences that had been demanding things like this. We want to see authentically Black people with films that are designed and appeal to the Black community. So then you get the production of films and media that are centering the audiences that are demanding these things. Now, the Blaxploitation era is absolutely legendary for giving rise not just to a distinct genre and era of film, but also music, fashion, these kinds of things. We got the emergence of funk music, soul music, R&B music, for example, lots of trends in fashion coming from the sort of socio-political statements and commentary that are being made through this form of media. Right? Toward the end of its lifespan, toward the end, and maybe I kind of put a typo here because it's not between the 60s and the 70s. I would say it's more like between the late 70s and the early 80s. the blaxploitation era starts to die out. And the reason why it's dying out is because many of the films are starting to take on these like formulaic plots that aren't really unique. Every time, let's say if you live during like 1979, you want to go see a blaxploitation film, and then you go into the film in the theater, and it basically feels like you're watching the same film that you saw the last time you were at the movie, and the time before that, and the time before that. It became a thing where like the themes of blaxploitation film were like black people learning to fight, learning to be martial artists, being spies or something like that, and being wise. And then at some point in time, the film takes a turn where like there's some white man that's out to get us, and they have this evil plot to undermine the black community in some kind of way. And so it became predictable and it became mundane in a way. And so while the blaxploitation era certainly inspired lots of filmmakers, including Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, to name two, for example, you still had this period in time in which it was, for its time, it was very groundbreaking, but it just kind of died out. It became kind of irrelevant in a way. And so from there, you have a demand of like black people who are going, okay, yes, we get it. The white man is out to get us. We want to see ourselves as strong, but we want to see more roles of black people that aren't necessarily contextualized by racism. What if we could just have black people just be normal families? Because, I mean, who knows people, black people that are spies? Who knows black people that are trying to undermine these conspiracies by the white man? It becomes a thing where it's disconnected from what it means to authentically be black. So a lot of the criticism then evolves towards we just want to see black normativity and we want to see like just normal, ordinary families. Give us that. And so as we fast forward into the 80s, and from the 80s all the way through to the early 2000s, you get the evolution of Black portrayals in media, in which now there is a concerted effort to have film and TV shows that showcase ordinary Black families in a positive light. I would say, as far as like 2010, maybe you start getting this term Black excellence. It wasn't a term that came from the 80s at all, but it kind of evokes this sentiment. And so I'm using that language here of like Black people with refreshing imagery. They're economically successful. They have families. They have a large home. Their life experiences are not necessarily contextualized by racism in any real way. Shows like these rarely ever challenged racism like at all. And the emergence of these shows, especially shows like The Cosby Show, for example, is a critical response to the criticisms of the blaxploitation era. I want to show you this clip here because I think it perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to describe here. Again, it's a YouTube video. I'm sorry if there are commercials. It's not my intent to play the commercial, but as soon as I can skip it, I will. Great. Ooh, sorry. Oh, no sound. Okay. I understand that some people cannot hear the audio, so I apologize for that. All right. Okay, so to the people in the chat, I am so sorry. Apparently, the Zoom is not showing any or sharing audio, and I am so sorry for that. I did not know that. I will work to make adjustments on that in the future, although I am trying to shy away from videos entirely. It's kind of unavoidable with the topic of discussion. Essentially, what you're seeing here, and I'll be sure to include these videos in the Patreon resource link so that you can watch these videos on your own. I'm so sorry that you did not hear the video. In the recordings, you will be able to hear it. I apologize. Um, Basically, Bill Cosby here, right? The same Bill Cosby that would eventually be found guilty of drugging women with Quaaludes and raping them while they're under the influence is the same Bill Cosby here that is just portrayed as an ordinary dad. And what he's trying to teach his son here is financial responsibility. So thank you to the person in the chat that remembered the scene and was able to describe it in some way. And so Bill Cosby takes this money, monopoly money, gives it to his son and says, "This is your money for your paycheck." Now, when you're living on your own, you've got to pay rent, you've got to pay bills, you've got to keep the lights on, you're going to have a girlfriend. And essentially, at no point, almost nowhere, I want to say, maybe in like one or two episodes in its entirety, The Cosby Show never talked about racism at all. Okay. And so to some extent, what's happening here is it's like a double-edged sword. In one sense, it's exactly what America wants. We want to see Black people just be ordinary individuals. We don't want to see them necessarily weighed down by racism all the time. We're not looking for poverty porn or something like that. We just want to see Black people on TV and be wholesome. And so we got that. And the Cosby Show would essentially propel Bill Cosby to a period in which, even in the eyes of America, he was like America's dad, right? At the same time, the films and TV shows like these, where we're portraying ordinary Black people, um, also comes with this unfortunate caveat. And the caveat is that it creates a phenomenon called enlightened racism, okay? Where you get lots of shows, not just the Cosbys, you also get Everybody Hates Chris, Family Matters, Barney Mac, the Hughleys, Different Strokes, Fresh Prince, the list goes on. You have all of these Black families here, but now their representation is paving the way for a new kind of racial sentiment. And that is that white audiences, white consumers who are watching these things are beginning to reflect on their own racism, and they're starting to diminish the significance in their own racism because they invite these Black families, fictional families, into their homes at nighttime because they like watching these shows. Well, then clearly, to a white person, I don't have a problem with Black people. I don't think there's a problem with Black people at all. And look at what is happening here. Look at how Black America has done this for themselves. So what are all these Black people complaining about, talking about injustice, talking about police brutality, talking about racial discrimination? What can they possibly mean? Look. And so the reality is that it's fictional. It's fake. It's not real, right? And so, yes, to an extent, it is absolutely awesome that the evolution of television and film has led to the emergence of wholesome TV shows. On its own, The Cosby Show is in fact a wholesome TV show. I want to acknowledge that. However, it leads to this phenomenon in which now there are other people who think that they're not racist. They don't have racialized sentiments, attitudes, or beliefs, or perpetuating negative forms of racism if they can somehow enjoy TV shows like this. And so it morphs the dialogue, the national dialogue on race and racism, into one in which clearly it just means that like the Black people who are complaining about discrimination and things like that, they're just not trying hard enough. They're not trying hard enough because uh look at the Huxtables, right? Look at the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Look at Everybody Hates Chris, the Rock family, right? It becomes a thing where like people have internalized, somehow bought into the false images that they are seeing on the screen as somehow being reflective of reality. And so there comes this time where it's like a disconnect where even today, there are lots of people who will go, I don't understand the Black Lives Matter movement. What are you complaining about? What are you talking about? There's systemic racism and systemic discrimination. No, there isn't. I don't see it. That's not there. And so it creates this phenomenon just like this. So it shifts the dialogue on race and racism too. And it's not just for Black people. It's also for Asians, right? Throughout the 70s, especially into the early 2000s, but well beyond it anyway, you had this growing popularity of martial arts films that were largely introduced by Bruce Lee. Hopefully, you all know who Bruce Lee is. I've taught an entire classroom full of people who do not know who Bruce Lee was. And I was so upset. I was so disappointed. So hopefully you guys know who I'm talking about. I know the person who watched The Cosby Show certainly does. But hopefully we're not that far gone just yet. Okay. Anyway, with the emergence of martial arts film, you get this internalization among American society where like martial arts is understood to be integral to like East Asian culture. And it's creating and then reinforcing stereotypes about Asians. Where, like, if you meet an Asian person on the street, you better be careful because they might be able to kick your ass like Jackie Chan, right? And so the reality is that, yes, while martial arts is in fact a fundamental part of Asian culture and a discipline of culture, it is not necessarily the case that just by virtue of being Asian, all Asian people can suddenly run on the walls and do backflips and they're acting like Bruce Lee and Jet Li, right? And so it wasn't Bruce Lee's intention to create a stereotype and then to create a genre of film that would then reinforce those stereotypes. It's just a consequence of what would happen in relation to the popularity, the growing popularity of this genre. The same thing for Muslims and Middle Easterners, right? Is especially post 9/11, you had this epidemic, I want to characterize it as, where there's this growth of war in the Middle East type films, the terrorism type films. Some of them are dramas, some of them are action, some of them are comedies, and everywhere in between. And they're like portraying Arabs and Muslims as like all somehow just being these turban wearing, suicide bomb vest wearing people who are evil and up to no good, and they want to like overthrow American notions of freedom, right? And so this begins to create a phenomenon that, believe it or not, is also fundamentally tied to a rise in hate crimes and racial profiling, targeting not just Arabs, but Sikhs too. But it's a thing where, like, you get the reinforcement, not only the creation of a racial stereotype around Islamic terrorism, but the reinforcement of that stereotype too. That, like, to some degree, audiences are like believing this idea that the images that they're seeing on the screen, the promotion and the pumping of these repeated similar images is like that's like a reflective of reality in some way. Even though they're all fictional, even though they're all fake, yes, there have been acts of Islamic terrorism, but no, not everybody is a terrorist by virtue of identifying as a Muslim, right? So it creates this phenomenon like now as we fast forward into the modern era, and there's literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of films. You'll have to forgive me for my estimate here because I really don't know how many movies there are. Um, it's a thing where like the overwhelming abundance of films has not only created stereotypes, but then reinforced stereotypes that then yield influence on social and political reality. And so now I want to turn this into a philosophical lecture before we jump into the Q&A here. And the philosophical part of this that I at least want to explore in an ideal way is why do you think that racial stereotyping is so significant in the cinematic arts? Why is it that we have like it is kind of odd to see black people with afros in a dojo, right? Let's see. Somebody in the chat says, I want to see what you're saying here. Um, okay. To push a familiar narrative. Part of it could be to push a familiar narrative. Part of it could be because that's what sells, right? What sells is this was a popular film, so if we make something like it that follows the same formula, then we can make money. So you end up putting more out there. And it's not necessarily, oh, well, we're doing this because we want to make these people look this way, more than it's just that's the formula that works. What else? What are people saying? This has also led to misconceptions of racism in the United States by the world that consumes Hollywood. Yes, that like racism is like not a thing in the US, or that like somehow, oh, racism is like worse elsewhere. It keeps white supremacy thriving. Yeah, it does keep white supremacy thriving in a way, but is cinema itself inherently white supremacist? I'm going to say no. I don't think that, right? It can be a vector for white supremacy, right? So it becomes a thing where like, let's explore this a little bit. And I want to introduce a few concepts to you, okay? So in exploring this concept of like, why is it that film reinforces these stereotypes? I'm going to present it to you as like a convenient accident. And part of the reason why I'm presenting it to you as a convenient accident is because seldom do filmmakers actually set out with the intention to make a film that actually makes a group of people look bad. Now, in the case of Birth of a Nation, that is absolutely the case. They totally set out to make Black people look as shitty as possible. They absolutely wanted to popularize the KKK. That is very clear. It's plain. That's objective. Okay. At the same time, I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to make a film before. I've certainly done a lot of that in my life. I'm currently working on film projects right now, right? It's a thing where, like, you just want to make good art, regardless of your racial identity. And in making that good art, you're bringing with you a lot of these values and beliefs about the world that you're creating that people have to view on a screen that are in fact racialized. And so, whether intended or not, because those images are in fact racialized, it's going to elicit racialized interpretations from their audiences. Okay, so part of the issue here. Let me remove the chat screen because it's blocking my view. Sorry. Part of the issue here comes from the creators. The creators do, in fact, have racial biases that end up in the films that they're creating. The other part of the problem is the audiences that are interpreting the images that they're seeing. Now, on the far extreme end of the polar spectrum, yes, you do have the Birth of a Nation. That's absolutely clear. But when we get to like The Little Mermaid, for example, and I'm talking about the 1989 version, right? The Disney version that was animated. Here, this is just a movie about a mermaid for its time. But then now we fast forward a few decades later, where again, the creators just want to make a movie about a mermaid. And so, because that mermaid is not white, it elicits a vile, vehement response, right? Um, it's a thing where, like in The Green Inferno, for example, this is a film by Eli Roth, who works closely with Quentin Tarantino, has made movies like Hostel and Hostel Part 2, for example, very gory horror films. The premise of this film is that a group of filmmakers fly into Brazil, I think, to film a student project or a commercial or something like that. And then their plane crash lands in the Amazon, and they're surrounded by cannibalistic, tribal, indigenous people who are essentially eating them and killing them one by one. And the indigenous people that were filmed in this movie are actually the indigenous people of the Amazon. Okay, so now it creates this phenomenon where Eli Roth is just trying to make a horror film, but in doing so is now creating commentary on indigeneity in the Americas, right? There's several infamous scenes in the Temple of Doom in Indiana Jones, for example, where Indiana Jones, his love interest, and the young boy played by Ke Huy Quan is sitting at a dinner table, and they're having eyeballs and monkey brains for dinner. They're eating all of these taboo foods that don't actually exist in Indian culture at all. But because he's trying to create an over-the-top, campy kind of thing, it ends up being a racial commentary on Indian culture that he wasn't trying to create. So there's lots of areas in which it can be the creator's fault. The creator is bringing their racial bias into the work that they're producing. But then at the same time, the audience is also carrying with them a racialized interpretation. And I create this for just a kind of theoretical example here. We're almost done. The theoretical example here is, let's take the Matrix, right? And the creators of the Matrix, the Wachowskis, They're just making an action film that is basically a rehashing of Ghost in the Shell. Yes, I know what Ghost in the Shell is. Okay, so they're just recreating Ghost in the Shell, but in live action form. And so, to some extent, I don't know the Wachowskis. I haven't talked to them. I would love to meet them if I ever could. But here, they're just trying to make a good film. And in this film, they're emphasizing a few key things. The darker yellow here, I would say, are the major themes that are emphasized, and then the light yellow are like secondary emphasis, right? Is like part of the character of Neo is that there is a religious emphasis. He's like a Christ-like savior in a way. Part of it is ableism. This is a commentary on ableism, believe it or not, because it is an action film. They're doing martial arts, they're shooting people, they're fighting, they're having gun battles, and right, all of those things. So ableism is a core part of this film too. And then gender to some extent too, that we're following a male protagonist. Most of his characters are male. The emphasis of the film is less about race, less about class, less about ageism and sexuality. But in the audience's interpretation of the film, they're not the ones that are making this movie. So they have no way to see the film in exactly the same way that the creators intended. And so what ends up happening is where you have all of these layers that, like it or not, are still visible on the screen, the audience is going to find a way to interpret those layers anyway, right? Where there is, in fact, a racial layer. To some extent, although I don't think that it was in the Wachowskis' intent to create a magical Negro archetype, the character of Morpheus ends up being like a magical Negro. Then there are gender, right? We can say that, for example, we're taking away the accurate gender-based interpretations here. Then there's commentary on class, where classism is a thing that you have to buy into this false belief about reality and create a fictional world that's isolated from the abhorrent dystopian truth around us, right? Yes, we see that it's an action film and we know he's a Christ-like figure, but there is still a commentary on ageism. There is still a commentary on sexuality with his romantic interest in Trinity, right? So it becomes a thing where the audience is even maybe taking away layers of interpretation that the creators didn't necessarily intend, almost entirely because that's what's visible on the screen. That's what's there. So, in terms of race, yeah, the artist's vision can in fact be racially biased because the artist or the creator brings their racial bias into the creation or the production of their true vision, right? But they don't have really any control over how audiences are going to receive that art, which means that audiences might find commentary, social commentary of some kind, where the creators didn't necessarily intend it at all. The other aspect of this, almost done here, is that yes, to some extent, it is the audience's fault. Most audiences are not trained in the art of filmmaking, and that means that that can include how they interpret and receive film. Whenever people go into a horror film or something like that, and they give these like over exaggerated reactions, and you can see that to some extent, the images that they're seeing on the screen, they're really buying into the world that they're observing here. And yes, there is a conscious awareness that what they're seeing is fake, but because they're suspending their disbelief, it means that psychologically, whether we like it or not, they are still undergoing a process of interpretation in which they are in fact buying into the world that the filmmaker has artificially created. So it creates a phenomenon where there are in fact layers of commentary on race, on class, on sexuality, on ableism, on all of these things that the creators don't necessarily intend, but that are inserted into that film anyway. And because the audience is suspending their disbelief, they are actually believing much of the commentary that they see as if it is a reflection of reality, leading to notions of the reinforcement of white supremacy and white superiority. And here, the notion of white supremacy and white superiority that I kind of want to spotlight here is this idea that when we see images of whiteness being celebrated, it's never that there is a conscious intent, or at least to my extent, I don't want to say never. Okay, maybe that's too strong of a word. Rarely is it a conscious intent by film creators to go, we're going to worship whiteness as much as we can and in the best way possible, and we're going to make whiteness look glorified and godlike. But in actuality, what ends up happening is American society is so used to the reproduction of images of the glorification of whiteness that it actually becomes taboo It becomes sacrilege in a way to see Black people positioned in this way. And so, in and of itself, it becomes a thing where we expect to see whiteness as like being better than or worshiped even by people of color, by brown people. That whiteness somehow has power over the masses of people of color who like willfully follow white people, even if they don't know what they're doing and have no clue about the ramifications of what's going on around them. And I'm talking about in terms of the plot, right? Okay, so the in the suspension of the audience's disbelief, they are unconsciously buying into the messages and images that the version of reality that these creators are producing, and that influences how audiences then perceive reality. And so when we get images like that, we end up with a phenomenon in which mass media actually plays a critical role in how people are racialized. And because people are racialized, and that racialization is then reinforced by the reproduced images that we see on the screen, it has a way of getting into and influencing our psyche in ways that we both knowingly and unconsciously cannot control. Okay. So, with that, that is the end of my lecture on racism in mass media. But I want to introduce somebody to come and speak for just a second. I have to manipulate some controls on my screen, so I have to take off the screen share, but I'm going to put it right back up, I promise. Um, and this person, just last week I was at Costco, and I was buying a slice of pizza. Oh my God, there's so many people here! Yay! I was buying a slice of pizza, and this person named Layla just walked up to me because she recognized me, and she immediately goes, "Hey, are you Dr. Doyle, so and so?" And we had this conversation uh, about racism and what's going on social media. And she had this really interesting idea that I actually wanted her to present. So if Layla's here, I would like to give Layla the floor to be able to share the idea that we talked about, and then we'll transition from there into Q&A. Layla, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Okay, please take it away.
All right. So, hello to everybody. I I saw Dr. Doyle, as he said, at Costco, and he was so gracious with his time, which I truly appreciate. And my question to him centered around what would be the cumulative effect of the amount of violence that we have seen or have been consuming over the last couple of years as we have witnessed conflicts in Sudan um, and Gaza and everywhere else. And so he asked me if I would speak, and I took the time to write my thoughts. So a few days ago, I opened Instagram to find a video of a 3-month-old who leg was hanging on literally by the skin. And the doctors, they were working frantically to staunch the bleeding and remove the shrapnel to save her life, but she didn't survive. I was shocked, but I was able to move on to the next video and continue my day largely unbothered. But it got me to thinking, when did I become so desensitized to the violence that the death of a child would not bother me? I would be able to pick up and go on. And my next question was, what are the long-term effects on our society with this level of acceptance of violence? So I started reading. And in my reading, I learned that consistent online consumption of violence enacted on non combatants desensitizes the viewer, and a subset of those viewers will be more likely to either ignore or participate in violence on non combatants in their actual lives, which to me seems kind of scary in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and all the violence that followed as a result. Most Americans, when we think of violence, we consume violence every day, to be clear, TV shows, movies, commercials. But when we think of violence, we think literally of a TV show, a movie, a video game. And if someone were to describe having your arm cut off or having an execution style shooting, the first visual that would pop up in most people's heads would be that from a movie. right? And that movie would have had a very clear framework of morality, identifying who the victims were, who the hero is, and who the bad guys are, right? That and any violence that is then visited on those bad guys would be seen as justified. But what happens when the violence that we consume doesn't have a clear resolution or work within a moral framework that we can agree with? Americans have been consuming extremely violent content consistently for the last 2 years. Congo, Sudan, Gaza, UK, France. We've all borne witness to violence being enacted on non combatants, women, children, elderly, sick, disabled, protesters, etc. And unlike fictional violence, because we can see a television show and separate, this isn't real, right? What we're watching, this footage, it's very real, it's very visceral, and it lacks the clear moral guidelines of heroes and a tidy resolution, right? That consistent consumption can overwhelm your senses and require that we escape to disconnect physically, mentally, emotionally to protect our psyche, except that you can't really escape it, right? And repeated exposure without the ability to act can unfortunately make us care less, become numb, and maybe even justify the harm that we see, especially when the victims that are experiencing the harm are others. We know from data that repeated exposure to violence without a clear moral framework leads to desensitization. And that desensitization creates a climate where the viewer can develop a tolerance or even an appetite for the violence, which often shows up as either ignoring it or even participating in that violence in their own lives. This violence is always focused outward on a group that is considered other: immigrants, racialized ethnic groups, or non dominant religious groups. And in an environment of scarcity, right, where resources are low, individuals often default to hierarchical thinking, where they allow themselves to be entrenched further in racial stereotypes, which further dehumanize the people they see as competition for the resources. They seek out groups that will echo and amplify and justify their own violent behavior or their tolerance for the violence in their presence. Social media platforms, I think we all agree, provide a safe space for othering our neighbors with racist ideologies, conspiracy theories, and hate speech. Fortunately, data has also shown that increased exposure to violence also can have the opposite effect. When viewing violence that is clearly understood to be unjust or extreme, many people are moved to take action in the form of direct intervention, advocacy, or protest. And so, my question for you, um, for Dr. Doyle, is the same one as well that I asked myself. How do we choose to respond? I choose to resist desensitization, to embrace empathy, and to treasure when I feel outrage, right? I don't want to feel numb. To seek out opportunities to take action, which gives me a place to put those big emotions that watching this type of violence can elicit. And I actively remind myself not to see the victim as other, but as human beings whose lives matter just as much as my own. And I challenge you to do the same. That's my piece, sir.
Thank you so much, Layla. That is powerful. And I want to use that as a way to segue into the Q&A. Because here I want to segue into this. I think this has implications on the reproduction of images, how it shapes audience's psyche, how we become desensitized, and it has real world implications beyond just the idea of racism. And it evolves into something where now we're looking at the rationalization of violence, even of political opponents or people on the other side of the world. And I want to open it up to the audience to either chime in, share ideas about this, ask questions. Layla put on me this question of, well, how do we respond? And it was such a profound question for me because How I respond personally is I choose to avoid finding ways to desensitize myself, right? And that means avoiding the reproduction of these images because I want to expose myself. I want to understand the humanity and I want to be able to connect to the humanity of other people, regardless of who they are. But I can't speak for a massive audience. And so I figured this would be a phenomenal question to open up to an audience and to maybe chime in their perspectives. So one by one here, if you would like, to chime in. You're welcome to turn on your camera if you would like, but you can certainly unmute yourself. But it would be nice if you can raise your hand. If you could hit the raise hand button, and we can just kind of go one after the other. But how do you feel about this? What are your thoughts, and how do you think it connects to what we just talked about in the lecture for this week? Are there any thoughts about this? I know there were thoughts in the chat. Is anyone who chatted a comment? Would they like to share it aloud? If you don't find the raise hand button, you're welcome to simply unmute. Oh, here's Vera. Vera, please. You
Okay, I'm
have the
trying to
floor.
mute myself. Okay. Hi. No,
Wow.
I thought this was great because actually coming up in one of my 101 classes, we are focusing on the misrepresentation of marginalized groups in cinema. So um we're looking at bell hooks, as the authors who discussed this, Roxane Gay, Miriam Gerpa, Nancy Wang, Elliot Page. So I got a lot of additional resources from this lecture that I'm going to incorporate and actually show media clips and the idea of Black women always being the mammy or the maid in cinema, and how you brought up Heidi McDaniel, because that's something we also do in my class. Fast forward 50, 60 years later, and Octavia Spencer wins the Oscar again for Maid. So I just want to say, no, this was a great learning experience for me, and I'll definitely incorporate a lot of what was given to us right now into the following unit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone who would like to share their perspectives on this very important topic, this very important question around the desensitization of violence? Lydia, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Sorry, my question's actually not so much about the desensitization, just kind of more about the general topic. I have a question about kind of mass media, going back to mass media. Um, how do you think, and I know you talked about the Cosby Show, how do you think that the people were inviting the Cosbys into their home, as you said, and then how do you think that changed when everything went down with Bill Cosby and the rape allegations?
Sure. I think first of all, there at least I can only speak for myself. I can't. First of all, I can't speak for the rest of America. But for myself, having I grew up in the '90s, but I still grew up with the Cosby Show. I felt a sense of betrayal. There was a sense for me that wanted to find a way to deny the allegations that were being thrown at him because that was my hero, and I'm looking at Bill Cosby as this guy who I've loved for decades, and then it comes out that he's a monster, right? And so for me, I felt a very profound sense of betrayal. Now, I myself am not the kind of person who will deny evidence that could change my beliefs. That's just how I roll. So for me, it was the uncomfortable and unsettling gripe with coming to terms with the fact that this hero was not who I thought he was. And then beyond that, just being able to say, okay, I have to let this go. I have to move on, and we can't acknowledge or overlook the atrocities that were happening while he was presenting himself in this way. And that's my thought about it. If anyone else wants to chime in and share something different, you're more than welcome to. Perhaps you felt similar, but also different in a way.
Yeah, thank you for that input. I was just thinking about how you said it was a way for people to like invite them into their home and kind of justify their lack of racism. And I'm wondering if that kind of tipped them back the other way, like, oh, maybe I am racist, like self-reflecting, or if it was too far past the point of the
Sure.
show kind
I
of
can't I can't say for myself that there was a racial takeaway, and I would say it is unlikely that other people had a racial takeaway, but I can't say with 100% certainty.
Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you, Lydia. I'm sorry, I do not read Russian, so you may unmute your mic, but please tell us what your name is.
Hello, I go by Elena.
Elena, hi.
Yes, hi. I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with the first question. It can be a hot take, but like, let's say, is there such thing where quote unquote people, like in the dominant white culture, they don't only appropriate, let's say, for example, jazz or maybe rap a little bit, but then they sort of reshape and control because I don't know, I might be mistaken, but for the last couple of years with the like rise of like cloud rap, and I hope I'm not reinforcing anything and forgive me if I'm like being ignorant. Um, Lately people use this like rise in rap to sort of like prove like, oh yeah, look, black people don't only care about this and that or money or like crime. So I wanted to ask if there is a way for these white basically supremacists to control the narrative or try to reshape it and make things more popular on purpose.
Yeah, I would say that part of it's difficult. To some extent, you could characterize it as white supremacy. To some extent, you could characterize it as capitalism, and then there's a significant overlap. Overlap. Part of that overlap there is because what do you find? What do audiences find popular, and how can you monetize it? And then in monetizing the thing that audiences find popular, you have to reproduce it, right? Which means to some extent, because the producer and the creative visionaries behind the production are the ones that are creating that, um, it means that to some extent they do have control over what gets popular to some extent, not entirely, but they kind of do. It can kind of narrowly control how audiences view race, and on that front, gender, sexuality, etc. Um, but I think it's also on audiences to understand that in mainstream culture of any kind, it's always fictional. It's fake. It's a stylistic, artistically produced image that is made to evoke specific kinds of ideas and emotions about what viewers are seeing. And so on that basis, we don't get to see, for example, any of the arguments that celebrities have with their spouses. They might be just everyday people. They put on their pants like we do, they breathe like we do, and you don't get to see any of that. You only see the stylized lighting. Maybe they look cool with an explosion behind them. Maybe they've got a bunch of flashy money and they're rapping to a cool beat. It's all artificial to some extent. So part of the promotion of this image around black people only liking money and cars and women, it's because that's the formula that works for popularizing people in that medium and in that art form. But when they go home, when those rappers go home, behind closed doors, they're just people like you and me. And so many people buy into the belief of the images that they see that they forget the reality is right behind it. Does that answer your question?
Can I just, yeah, and like ask another additional question to that? But the way that it's fictional like that, is it on purpose
Yeah,
or
yeah. I'll tell you right now. What's a good example? I'm in my living room right now. So my background is blurry, right? You can't see anything that's going on around here. I've got my couch and my TV. There's a bathroom right across the hall. You can't see any of that, right? If I were to show you, I've been waiting to do this because I have this one video. I make film. Okay, I've acted in a bunch of stuff. I have a cameo in Grey's Anatomy, for example. Um, and they name drop me, but it's not actually me. And they say, "Hey, Julius, come in here. We need you." And I step into the ER room, and then even though it's Julius, it's not me. There's lights, and they do multiple takes. All of it is fake. It's all crafted because it's made to convince people to spend their money on buying that album or buying the next season for that TV show or buying the movie on DVD or get the streaming service on. It's all fake, and it's all fake for a monetized purpose. And so what happens is people think they see the celebrity that they know on TV, and it's a completely different person in reality.
Well, I understand that. I'm sorry that I'm taking so much time with this. No, I understand that it's well fictional. What I don't understand is how, again, if racially the narrative is creating where people are actually strengthening their biases
Mhm.
because of what fiction is being most profitable because of the capitalism, basically.
So your question is, why is it that there an artificial narrative that's being created around false ideas?
No. Is it really being created on purpose?
Oh, I see.
For the
Created
sake
on
of
purpose.
white
I
supremacy.
see. I see. Part of it is no. No, part of it is whatever images that are chosen to be crafted is a reflection of that artist's vision. It's not for the sake of white supremacy and there's some conspiracy. No. At the same time, whatever images or medium is convenient for sustaining white supremacy, there can be artificial selection in that favor. So, for example, Charlie Kirk, right now, this guy, up until recently, a lot of people didn't know who he was. And I had been commenting on his videos because I knew who he was, but he's like a white supremacist. This guy says a lot of evil things. But now, because his death is convenient for the political purposes of conservatism in the United States, they're now taking his images and likening him to a Christ-like figure, a god, well, not a god, but a guy who's just a good family man who represents everybody's values. And the reality is, there's a lot of footage of him calling for public executions, right? He's saying things like black people only commit murder, they abandon their children, very evil things that are demonstrably false. And so because his death is convenient for the sake of white supremacy, they're trying to milk that cash cow. It's a thing where, yes, there are some art forms, fictionalized forms in media that are selectively chosen to amplify in order to sustain white supremacy, but not all of it is. Does that
Thank
answer your
you
question?
much. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Joshua, I saw your hand, and then afterwards, Layla. Joshua, welcome.
What's going on, Dr. Doyle? Thank you for welcoming me.
Yeah.
I actually just have a pretty simple question. Well, presumably simple. We're gonna find out together. But you touched on how habitually exposing oneself to images of violence in the real space, right? In the and not in a fictional sense, not in a movie sense, vis-a-vis all the footage we've been seeing of Gaza, Sudan, etc. Do you find that there's a balance between being informed and not being afraid to see what's happening and also desensitizing yourself? Because on one hand, I completely concur, and it's obviously evident based on the data and findings through clinical research. But on the other hand, we live, I'm going to word this correctly. We live in a nation, a lot of us, where I'm trying to articulate this. A lot of us aren't privy to violence in our face, right? A lot of us. So my question is, where's the balance? What's the balance between being deliberately misinformed and ignorant and not desensitizing yourself?
That's a great philosophical question that I don't think has a right answer. If I'm
Right? Like what I'm
honest with
supposed to do to shut the phone off? Like,
you. Right. I think to some extent on one side, I know what's going on in Gaza. I know what's going on in Sudan. To me, it becomes desensitizing when I constantly see those images. At the same time, I can't personally, I can't take too much of it. It doesn't mean that I don't want to advocate. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be misinformed. It just means that I don't want to see, I just don't want to see violence all the time. At the same time, that also means that I am removing myself from becoming a vector for getting these people's voices and their needs out there as far as they can. And I don't think there is any one right way to balance it. I think if a person is informed, and if by virtue of that information is doing what they can to spread awareness or to do what they can to intervene if they have the power to do so, that's one way. But it's on a personal basis how much of that you can actually consume before you turn it off, and to what extent are you turning it off before you jump back in and become active again. I don't think there's a right answer to that, but that's a phenomenal question.
Hey man, yeah, I totally respect that because frankly, I don't have an answer to it either, and it is pretty philosophical. And I think, not to digress too much, but just to comment on it, before I resolve, it's essentially I listen to my nervous system when I'm starting to feel ridiculously anxious whilst watching all said footage. I'm like, okay, I think it's time to turn it off, go on and meditate, do some breathing, and maybe do some actual reading and
Yeah.
create the images in my own head, and then we'll come back to it later.
Yeah, one person in the chat, Valeria, she says, "I feel like I'm the only one going insane about what I'm seeing, and I see now I'm not the only one. Thank you for the space." Absolutely. No, you're not the only one. And it's been a thing where like I feel like part of a little bit of lingering conflict. AJ, could you mute your mic for me, please? um Thank you, part of the conflict that like me and my wife have been having is because I'm like, yo, can I not see that on the screen? Can I not hear that in the background? But she's like, what? I'm trying to stay informed, I'm trying to blah blah blah, and we have this back and forth where I'm like, I know I'm informed, but I'm just I it's too much for me. And so it's that thing where it's subjective, it's preferential, it's a thing where it's like, who knows what is the red line for what you cut off and what you entertain and what you don't entertain. And I'm sorry that I think that's a phenomenal question, especially in relation to what Layla said. Layla, would you like to chime in?
Actually, yes, I can talk about for me. Number one, I choose to continue to educate myself. And sometimes, like you said, it's through media and sometimes it's through reading. I actually started reading the 100-Year War on Palestine. I started reading the Palestine Laboratory because I needed to understand what was the history that took me to now so that my outrage makes sense, but also my advocacy. The second thing I do is I talk to others. If I'm not actively consuming, I do feel like the only real difference to me, between the Black person and the Palestinian is that we lived in a country that wrote out a constitution that said all men, and they did not. So they are able to discriminate based on their constitution, and we were able to weaponize ours and said, you said all men, you didn't say all white men, you said all men, and I'm a man, right? So I feel like on some level, I have an obligation to bear witness because my mother desegregated the schools, and my mother didn't get the right to vote until she was 26, and my father was 34, right? But okay, so I educate myself. I talk to others about it. I find a way to donate my time locally, if I can, to organizations that are contributing to the larger problem. And then I show up. I do go to protests. I do repost media or points or amplify those voices. That's what I do. And when I reach a point where I need to take a step back, I allow myself to do that. But I remind myself that this is a struggle, not just for one group, because this is a test market. We are right now in the US dealing with the effects of the technology that they perfected and weaponized in Israel. And the only way that we stop that is if we make sure that this cannot happen. It fails this time so that it won't duplicate itself. Okay, but I have a question, Dr. Doyle. You were talking, you were talking about during the Blaxploitation period. And it sparked something for me. I thought about Denzel Washington and Halle Berry, how these people have been phenomenal actors and played phenomenal roles, but the only two roles they won awards for were when they played the white version of what they think ghetto looks like. And that to me was reinforcing to filmmakers and to the audience at large that this is what we want to see from you. Denzel Washington has played so many roles, and what he won for was an out of control, violent, ghetto Black man. That blows my mind.
It's a thing where there is, in essence, a kind of racially homogenous control over what gets legitimized in mass media, and so what gets legitimized is usually awarded with awards, right? And so it's a thing then where there is an appeal to the reinforcement of notions of white superiority. Uh, those who lend their bodies, their voices, and their faces to reinforcing that notion will then be rewarded for it. And so I don't think that Denzel Washington or Halle Berry intentionally set out to go, I'm going to make white people feel good about themselves and they're going to give me an award for it. But that's generally how this goes. I think when it comes to the Oscars and things like that, I've got to be one of those people, and I don't mean this in a way to turn disfavor to my actor friends or brothers and sisters out there, but I'm not one who watches the Oscars or the Emmys or something like that. Part because I understand that there has always been a push by people of color, historically marginalized people, and underrepresented people in film to win those awards, and they're left to the choices of people who are not them to give them that legitimacy. And in my own personal belief, if they have that legitimacy, it's theirs on its own, and they don't need an Oscar or an Emmy or something like that. And I'm for me, it's just about how did I feel? How did that performance make me feel? Did I like it? Maybe the performance they won an award for is not the performance that I would personally award. And it becomes a thing where, for me personally, I have chosen to just subjectively distinguish from what people who control media, generally mostly white people, will legitimize in the media versus what I find to personally be legitimate. Because at the end of the day, for me and my lived experience, my perspective as an individual was all that really mattered. Does that make sense? But I know for them, when you get that award, you get bumps in pay, you get all kinds of, so it's a thing where it's like who you give your awards to gives them the ability to make more money, to secure more resources, to sustain themselves and build wealth. And I'm totally for that and I'm in support of that. But at the end of the day, it is regulated by a racial politic that is, in essence, a reinforcement of white-centered norms and standards. And so that's where I sit on it.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
I'm looking at when we look at what just happened with Jimmy Kimmel, right? And we understand that it wasn't about Jimmy Kimmel. It was about the owners of the TV stations that need to have this deal go through, and the FCC having to sign off on it, because currently the monopoly rules state that you can't have more than 39% ownership of the viewing audience. And in order to be able to get the deal to purchase the secondary network and increase their footprint, they need to capitulate to this administration. My question is, do you think that we're going to see this become worse or regress, this stereotyping, and of course the push for the white supremacy, the white savior, the white fill in the blank, as media becomes more and more controlled by a very, very few, very, very right-wing racist owners?
Yeah. I don't know, to be honest with you. I think part of it is dependent on how successful this administration can actually be with the culture war that it's launching, right? if the Trump administration can in fact be successful at influencing who has freedom of speech on national airwaves, then I do believe that the natural corollary is going to be a regression back into more antiquated forms of media and cinematic rhetoric. At the same time, uh, whether this administration is successful or not, I do ultimately think that we're going to come back around full circle to just where we are because this is how we got there. This is how we got here. We got here because we already went through all of this regressive bullshit. And so, okay, you want to go and revisit that, but then naturally, what's going to evolve from that is exactly where we are today. And this is a fundamental, I want to say, kind of philosophical, but to some extent, scientific problem with the politics of conservatism is conservatism is not really just conservative, it's also regressive. And so what ends up happening is you have a kind of misunderstanding of how we even got to the present in the first place and why we're in the present that we're in. And so what happens is if you want to regress us back to the past, okay, maybe we take a detour for about 50 years, but 50 years from now, we'll just end up right back where we are. And there's it just nothing's going to change. So ideally, then you just kind of want to evolve and adapt forward because otherwise we end up wasting so much time of our cultural, technological, and social evolution revisiting things that didn't work, only to rediscover why they didn't work and then end up right back where we are. So that's just how I feel about it. But does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, Josh.
Hey, what's going on, man? Great insights, both y'all. Layla, I just wanted to just anecdotally comment. There's a bit that's gone a little viral as it's super pertinent in these times. It's from Damon Wayans. He goes, "Y'all ever notice how it's always that one token brother who made a bunch of money who a white reporter wants to ask him this question? They go, Damon, now that you've made this $30 million, and we're not counting, but now that you've made this $30 million, we have a question for you. Is there racism in America?" And then he talks about, he goes, then you see that brother up there looking like, no, sir. And if there is, I ain't seen none. So that, I think, speaks to what you were trying to draw attention to. And it's really just capitulation. And I don't mean to degrade these brothers or speak disparagingly because, quite frankly, I got a family, I got a life, I got to pay the bill. And if somebody decided to give me $30 million for the thing that I would do for free anyhow, Lord knows I'd probably be doing the shits, right? However, I think we can also be honest with ourselves and realize that having ethics and morals and being financially successful are not mutually exclusive. And I think the truth is a lot of these brothers and sisters are deliberately swallowing their morals and ethics for the paycheck. And that is evident and obvious. And again, not judging, because judge not lest thou be judged. I don't do you, baby boy. But it is apparent. And their behavior is damaging. And it causes a negative communal effect. But I just wanted to touch on that because I love you so much, son. Hold on. Okay. But real quick, just all blabbing aside, I do have an actual question, not rhetorical, for you, Dr. Doyle. I've been doing my best to not live in a confirmation bias bubble, an echo chamber, essentially. I want to be. There's an inscription on the ceiling of my favorite, public library. It's the Detroit Public Library main campus. It says that essentially, I'm a paraphrase: gain knowledge so you can weigh said knowledge, and gain the wisdom for yourself, and see how you would like to deduce and resolve to feel about the knowledge in which you have absorbed. But like, I want to try. I know this sounds heinous. I essentially am just seeped in a lot of Black history from our perspective, a lot this, that, and the third. I did read for probably the first time sort of a colonizer's perspective, and she's even probably pretty left and progressive, but it was a great viewpoint from the Rhodesia, Zimbabwe area. It's called Don't Let Go to the Dogs Tonight, and it's written from the perspective of a white woman who went through that whole revolution. And it really made me actually feel for her a little bit because she's just a little kid, and then she's getting all this reverse animosity that Africans are projecting on these settlers because it's a myriad of reasons. It's multifaceted and nuanced. We can go into that later. But I did find it helpful. But I wanted to ask you what you think about trying to find the juxtaposed or contrary positions rather to the ones that you may believe or the ones that you may be attaching your identity to. And if you think that can be more harmful than good, because you might mess around and get swung,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a mixed bag. It's to some extent. First of all, as somebody who endorses the ideas around critical race theory, what's fundamental to critical race theory are counter narratives, right? Counter narratives that challenge the mainstream or like the predominant views or ideas. And so I fundamentally lean into that, even though some of those things elicit some very emotional responses from me. I think that's important because it means then that whatever your values are checked to some extent against the reality of somebody who doesn't endorse those values. And maybe you still disagree with what they might be saying on the other end of the table at the end of the day, but you still have your beliefs and values calibrated around the realities that there's a counter narrative out there. The moment you start narrow, like tunnel visioning on ideas that you firmly believe in, it's not going to be long before those ideas are like they're not even on planet Earth anymore, right? So for me, I do like on social media, for example, I'm not person who watches political news, so I don't turn on Fox News and things like that because I don't even watch MSNBC or like anything. I'm an NPR, PBS NewsHour guy. But beyond that, on like social media or something, I do follow bigots. And not just Charlie Kirk, it's other people too, Xavier DeRusso, Brandon Tatum, Ben Shapiro. I follow these people because, in part, because I want to stay grounded on earth and grounded in reality, while at the same time being able to sharpen the merit of my ideas by who they contrast with the most. And I think that's useful for academic reasons. I think it's useful for social reasons. But it's hard work and it's not easy. And one of the reasons why it's not easy is because you do have to hear lots of sometimes harmful ideas that you don't agree with. But in doing so, it means that you're kind of calibrated around a more realistic approach to society than just, I don't know, wishful thinking and then sticking your head up your own ass and then where and then you share your ideas with everybody and everybody's like, what are you talking about? That's like wishful thinking. Get out of here.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Elena?
Yeah, hi, it's me again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask another question about the current situation too. And it's gonna be a little layered, and I'm a little confused. I was listening and trying to understand how to like phrase it better. So basically, I guess I wonder about if it's possible to keep oneself safe out there, not online. And I just want to like explain what I mean because it's a little layered. So basically, I'm like not American born, but I'm an American citizen, and I've been here on and off. But of course, it confused me since coming from overseas, you get pushed like certain American narrative and stuff. Like, I mean, that of course is gonna crumble, and then you start to unpack. And naturally, I'm a brown person, so but since I'm not American born, I guess I've been kind of ignorant, let's say, till my mid-20s. And then as I started to educate myself on like mapping and other things and getting more and more like into the context of what was happening or is happening, I mean, in America, I kind of noticed that for the past couple of weeks, people have been a little bolder with like just, I don't know, their attitude. And although it's hard for me to perceive myself like 100% American, because again, I've been on and off since I was 3, now I'm 30. Um, I feel like, yeah, like I got some comments, people like basically telling me to like help my boyfriend carry the bags because that's what African people do. Like for the context, I'm near DC. So how I've been coping, I literally stopped leaving the house because I really don't understand how to cope. I know it's a bit, I don't know if it's like an okay way to ask this question because we kind of talk
Sure.
about
Yeah, go
different
ahead.
thing, but I guess it kind of like fits into the racial because I feel like, okay, I'm brown and should I leave the house? But then a lot of other people are, but then again, I have an accent, maybe my appearance.
I
So what do you think? What's your take? I'm sorry.
No,
What's
it's
your
okay.
take on
I I
safety and yeah.
I think right now we're living in a politically tumultuous time. And part of the reason for that is under the surface of American cultural evolution, there has always been a group of people. I don't want to say group because it's not like a group, but there's a wide range of people who embody the politics of misogyny, of let's say xenophobia, of racism, sexism, and so to some extent, Donald Trump has kind of given the nation permission to be more open about these things. Um, to what extent you're in danger, I can never really say. Physical harm, obviously, the United States has a problem with mass shootings. Outside of that, I can't say. It depends on where you are. I think in terms of social harm, being exposed to a lot of these ideas and then being motivated to change your behavior based on your exposure, I think is problematic. For me personally, my personal philosophy is to resist those kinds of ideas. I would encourage you to simply be and embody who you truly are. Don't give a shit about what other people might think or comment. And oh, so Africans are supposed to do this and women are supposed to do that. And your response, I'm not telling you what to say because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your response should be, who gives a fuck? Why do I care what you think about what I should and shouldn't do? I'm not you. And I'm going to do what I want to do. And what I want to do is I'm going to be this way. And if you don't like it, okay, who gives a fuck? I don't. And that's my personhood. That's my personal philosophy. Again, I'm not necessarily telling you everybody who says something you should get in their face and say, well, who gives a fuck? But it's that attitude of like, it only matters, it only has power if you give it power. And if it has no power, if those ideas and those beliefs have no power at all, then it's water under the bridge.
I want to say something like that can sound a little controversial, but I think it's real.
Yeah.
As I studied like the history just a little bit of what happened in America, how it went down, how it like how things that you would expect change, especially from again overseas, they didn't. Um, I kind of thought to myself, like maybe I didn't, it's gonna sound horrible, and I'm sorry in advance, maybe I didn't include myself in the picture entirely.
Okay.
I thought it's not gonna happen to me. This prejudice is not gonna happen to me. Like, I'm not from here, not my context sort of thing. And I feel bad about it because I mean it's mixed. I'm not an African American person. I'm like Russian Sudanese, so it's like North African. The lady, she was like, West African people should do this and that, and I was like, okay, but it doesn't matter because it's horrible anyway. And then I think, no, I mean, and I wanted to say that, yeah, I ended up standing my ground low key, but what I thought when it happened, I thought, okay, I'm in the context, big surprise. The second thing I thought, if she feels so emboldened to just like come up to me and say something like that, what can also people do if they feel threatened, annoyed, or something, especially when I don't pass as an American, I feel like, as much. So, and this is where the scary part is. Yeah, okay, I'll continue being myself, like who I am, basically. It's up to me. But like how people feel emboldened now, and if it's comments and they're that horrible, okay, what are you gonna do next? Like this is, and no one knows, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
I think meet if you have to meet words with words, right? Okay, you feel this way. I don't give a fuck. And I'm gonna tell. I will tell, and I'm not saying you, Elena. I just mean for somebody who's saying sharing the bigoted perspectives with you and telling you what you should do, and a good West African does. I don't give a fuck. Make me, force
That's
me. I don't
great.
know. It becomes a thing where like find your power in active resistance. And it might feel foreign and uncomfortable at first, but once you grow in that, it becomes natural. And then certain people's perspectives no longer have power no matter what you do, no matter how or what they say or how they say it. But again, I don't know you personally. I can't necessarily say to you, but if I was talking to my sister right now, like if you were my sister and she came to me and she said that this was how it feels, I'm talking to you like my sister. That's your response. Who gives a fuck? And let it bounce off of you too. Write it off your shoulder, bounce it off your chest, whatever you got to do. But like make sure that that person is aware that you don't give a fuck and let them feel awkward in it. Make it
I
awkward.
did actually. I did. I just stared at
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
until she just got so uncomfortable that I told her, like when she even got out on our floor, it was in the elevator, and I said, "It's not your floor."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't respond anything. But just one follow-up question. Okay, sure. Like resistance, like just I stared at her, it worked great. Like whatever. America is the nation of immigrants, so what the fuck? But the problem is, aren't you scared that some people are just gonna have guns and gonna like attack you? This is my concern. Like
Yeah.
I
Sure.
don't go out. I'm not far from DC. I'm in Virginia. I'm like right 15 minutes from
Sure.
Capitol. I'm
I,
in a
I
city
think
environment, but I don't go out necessarily as much for the past 3 weeks, as much, no, past 2 weeks. Because I'm like, what if someone gets annoyed and then they shoot or say, what the fuck, where are you
yeah.
from? I'm gonna open my mouth there, hear the accent, I'm gonna feel all suspicious. And then, that's like how, yeah, of course, you cannot care, but is it like a privilege for everybody when there is, ICE and stuff? Although I'm a citizen and I'm still scared of them.
To some extent, you're living how almost all Americans feel. Is at any point, at any reason, we're all kind of nervous about the fact that we don't know if somebody's going to decide to pop off or not. And it's uncomfortable, but it's an uncomfortable reality that we all have to live with, unfortunately. And in the middle of living in that reality, if you want to get back to some semblance of normalcy and ride it out, part of riding it out is going to be, I don't give a fuck. And to challenge it directly. And there are going to be, I don't think there's just like, it's a 50-50 chance that somebody has a concealed carry. And if you piss them off, they're going to pull it out and shoot you. But at the same time, is that how you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life scared and worried and blah, blah, blah? Because at the end of the day, you're still living, whether it's scared or not. So why choose to be scared? That's just where I'm at personally.
Thank
But I
you.
but I gotta get to two other questions before we're gonna wrap up. Josh, I'm sorry if we don't have enough time. I will make the effort to try to get back to you. But in order to be on time, I want to get to AJ and then Valeria. AJ.
Hi there, Professor Doyle. Just thank you for the time. Appreciate you just taking the time to educate folks as well. I'll try
Yeah.
to keep it short since I know our time's short here. Just in the era following, right, COINTELPRO and like Operation Mockingbird, where three-level organizations are paying certain media to facilitate stories. How do you both try to educate other people, but also try to keep yourself safe in the era where, Educate to Liberate largely got the Panthers taken out and other organizations that were challenging racism in the system itself? I just find myself like, I get told, oh, I'm not challenging racism the right way. And your theories have made it very easier to articulate. So I just wonder how you protect yourself, yet continue to stay motivated in doing the work in this time where media is often used to vilify folks like you who are really trying to shine a light and keep people more informed.
Yeah. I am first of all, I'm an educator because I'm a professor. I just started bringing my classroom, the camera into my class. So it has brought a little bit of attention, but the university is aware of that, and they are aware that I've received some death threats. So I've made them aware of that, and I trust campus safety. I trust the police. I trust the people that I've informed about this. I know there are several people that are aware of it, and at this point, I'm just going to keep moving forward. I'm moving straight, and I'm riding it out. And if things have to escalate to a level in which my safety is in danger, then I went out how I lived, and how I lived was I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to record the truth. I'm going to spread it as far as I can. I fundamentally believe in uniting all people for the common goal of humanitarian good. No matter what you look like, no matter what parts you have, no matter what language you speak or God you pray to, I'm on your side because your rights are my rights, your justice is my justice, your peace is my peace, and that's my philosophy. And if you want to kill me for it, okay, then great. Then I'm going to be the next martyr like Charlie Kirk, even though I'm not as big as him. Somebody out there is going to discover my work and discover what I have to say, and my legacy is going to live on. So I'm just going to move forward, and I'm going to move forward on faith that I can continue to come back home to my family and to cook them dinner and to take care of them. But if that has to end, then that's what God wrote for me. That's where I'm at.
Well, it's powerful to be in your presence, brother. You seem to live without fear, like Nina Simone talked about. And nah, man, you remind me more of Malcolm X talking and educating than that other guy. So thank you, brother. And I'll pass it on. Thank you for allowing folks to be here and be involved. All power to the people. Free them all. Free Jay Burton.
Thank you. Valeria.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's my first time on this platform, and I just wanted to share. I'm Puerto Rican. I think we have like an awkward situation where, yes, we are U.S. citizens, but we are in an island by ourselves. We are Hispanic, yet Hispanic people don't consider us as part of them because they see us as U.S. citizens. So we have this awkward identity in ourselves, and just continuing what Neha was saying that she wasn't aware. Well, I wasn't aware either of, this huge topic because Puerto Ricans, we don't see color, right? We are very mixed. And it wasn't until I moved to the States where I saw actually how big this issue is. And me, myself, like I feel also targeted because like I might be white looking, but I don't identify as white. And I do have an accent. I do speak Spanish. Now I can be targeted by ICE, and I'm also living in fear because of that. Now, when I go back home, I have this issue where, my family, for example, they don't see like, they don't see the racism as a big issue. It's more like, oh, Black people just have to, just shut up and deal with it. I don't know what the big issue is. And I do struggle with like trying to
We have 1
educate
minute
them.
left. If you could get to your question, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
We have 1 minute left. Yeah.
I could say, how can I make people see, especially like Puerto Ricans or people that are not black but are not white, to like see this issue,
Yep.
that, yeah.
I think part of it is going to be the people who are receptive are receptive. The people who are not receptive will never be receptive. The people who are curious, you can share resources like my Instagram page or to other educators that are out there, right? To try to expose somebody that you meet to someone who can educate them using scientific reasoning, using data, using research, right? I don't ground any of my politics in my emotions. And I let education, I let data, I let critical thinking and philosophy guide where the discovery of the truth is. And if you don't feel confident enough to engage in that way constructively on your own, then point them to somebody like me. But the people who are resistant to these ideas, they're never going to accept them no matter how hard you try. That's just the reality. But there are those people that can be convinced or have an open mind. And maybe those people, it's really just a matter of forwarding them resources like mine or other anti-racism educators out there. Joshua, I'm so sorry I cannot get to you for the sake of time because we're already over. However, next week we will be talking about mass incarceration in the United States. We'll be talking about the prison industrial complex, where that came from, the rise in crime rates, and all of the rhetoric around, well, in order to go to jail, you've got to commit a crime. And we're going to talk about all of that next week, okay? So chime in next week. I'll have the link updated sometime in the latter half of next week. Thank you so much for everybody joining. Josh, if you come back and you still have the same question, I'll take your question first, I promise. Thank you so much to the Instagram live chat. I really love you guys. This is amazing. I'm growing in my platform here, and I'm so excited to see what comes next. Thank you so much for sharing time with me, and I'll see you next week.